federal officials here in Canada provided intelligence on India to the Washington Post. And the thing that struck me about all of this is that I saw online, Lindsay, all of the complaining about, or how can one news agency out another news agency? Well, they clearly don't understand how the newsrooms work. But in this case, if Bob Fife's reporting is correct, and generally it is, we got to think that there's some really serious, implications here. If we've got the former Deputy Minister of Justice and now the National Security Advisor for the PM involved in somehow leaking what sounds like could be classified information to the Washington Post, don't you think that's the Globe and Mail's job?
It is the Globe and Mail's job, and kudos to Fife for reporting on it in this way. We need to keep having reports coming in this way, because it seems like, I don't know how you all feel. I feel like this is a soup of mess and confusion, and it's hard to read one article without having to go down the rabbit hole of reading about 6 or 7 other articles just to figure out what has happened, where is this going. But between India, foreign interference, all of the players seem faulty, full of holes, full of gaps, and obviously no one on the federal side are playing nice together in the sandbox. So who's the victim? Canadians. Again and again and again, each of us sits here with our papers trying to understand where the truth goes. And it keeps going back to the same place, which I think Fife alluded to, which is there needs to be greater transparency and then opening up of this box somehow, or else we're never going to get to the central truth. And it's something that I think Canadians deserve and should know more about.
Bob, when we look at this all gets tangled up because in terms of the timeline and the Prime Minister's appearance before the Foreign Interference Committee and the things that were said in that, this all just stinks in terms of timing, the play that's going on, the manipulation around the information. And it's hard to take the PM seriously when he chastises other media for coming out with reports that, he claims was classified information on other stories.
Criminal, he called it.
Yeah.
In the past when there've been leaks like this. So that's why this one is so fascinating. When I worked in government, we used to laugh sometimes and say, internally, when is a leak not a leak? When it's a strategic pre-release. And that's what we saw here, because not only was it a high-level leak, we don't have conclusive evidence that it was those 2 high-ranking individuals, but it sure seems like it based on the reporting. They gave a leak to a major American newspaper and did it under embargo, because the fine print in the story says that the information that was passed on was not to be reported until the day of the big Thanksgiving news conference that we had here in Ottawa, and the Post respected that. So I'm looking at trying to break down what was the motivation here, what was at play, because clearly the Trudeau government wanted to have that story play prominently in Washington on the same day. So they gave it not to some schlub reporter, they gave it to the Washington Post. They gave it as an exclusive, guaranteeing that it would get prominent play, as any exclusive does, and did it under embargo, timed with the actual official announcement. And that's probably some CYA in there, because if the Post had reported first, then they've got a real scandal on their hands. But this is still fairly scandalous in terms of the level of the intelligence that was provided in advance to an American media outlet. They got their play out of it. They got the feds got what they wanted from it. But it's interesting to see, okay, why was that so critically important? Why did they need that to make big news in Washington on that day?
Well, and I think the issue, as to Bob's point, Brett, is that, we're talking about Nathalie Drouin, who is the National Security Advisor for the Prime Minister's office. We're talking about, the Deputy Minister in Global Affairs being implicated in this. Now, whether or not they actually handed the envelope or have passed on the email with the details is beside the point.
Well, so let's take this back to the communications and strategy piece then. I have a Substack I write every week called Hot Takes, and I wrote about this last week, and I wrote about it naively believing that the RCMP and the government of Canada were doing the right thing by us all by announcing some public safety concerns that they had. They held this press on Thanksgiving Day, a very slow news day, because they really wanted to make sure that, that this, they got to do this on this holiday because this is critically important information. Well, for fuck's sakes, what they did was they gave this to the Post, as Bob said, under embargo. So this has been planned long ahead of time. This wasn't a hastily called presser, and I'm not suggesting it would have been, but it was under the guise of public safety. When really what we're, I think what I'm grappling with now is just how transparent are they being, or rather not being, as the case may be. And that this does, frankly, I think the Prime Minister's office thinks that this makes him look good because he is being transparent. He stood up in the House a year or so ago to tell the public that they had evidence of allegations of Indian government involvement with serious criminal activity, including murder. And so, yeah, I'm a little bit pissed off that that this is how this all played out by giving it to the Washington Post, making it look super important, yada, yada, yada. Well, in fact, the strategy behind all of this, and I'm not suggesting there shouldn't be strategy. There always has to be strategy. But that I feel a little bit deceived that the strategy was to show, look how transparent we are, rather than what it really should have been about, which was public safety.
Well, the problem with that line of thinking, though, Anne-Marie, as far as the feds are concerned, is that at the same time, the Prime Minister is talking about, well, I have seen the list of MPs and former MPs who've been implicated in the foreign interference stuff. And, it would be a good idea for the Conservative leader to step up and, pay attention to what's going on here. Not so long ago, the federal government was telling us that intelligence is not evidence, that in fact, that's why we don't spill the beans on some of these things. And everything that's going on here has only muddied those lines. There is no clarity in terms of what's the best practice and what's the best step forward now. Because if you start leaking shit to the Washington Post or the Globe and Mail or whoever, and then in the committee meeting, dropping these stink bombs because, well, I've seen the intelligence and is the underlying theme. I don't know who you trust. I don't care how transparent you think you're being. There's no trust anymore. There's no respect for the whole process.
I totally agree that I think that, as Brad said, they were trying to look like they were really transparent. So trust us because we're being very, very transparent. When really what they were being, it appears to be, is manipulative. They were trying to manage the story rather than protect public safety. And that's not being transparent. So I just am a flummoxed most of the day that why the Liberals keeps shooting themselves in the foot all the time. And I'm just confused why that keeps happening, but it certainly keeps happening over and over and over again. And I just wish, I wish they wouldn't, but that seems to be where we are now.